welcome to the program today. I'm Layo Olarinde. We begin in Kenya, where 2 planes have collided in Nairobi, with authorities confirming 2 people dead. 44 others escaped unharmed in the incident on Tuesday morning. Now, one of the planes involved is a Dash 8 owned by Safari Link, bound for Diani with 44 passengers and crew. The other is said to be a Cessna plane on a training session that was carrying 2 people. Now, the Cessna crashed in the park while the Dash 8 safely landed back at the Wilson Airport. According to officials, both planes had taken off from the Wilson Airport. Our Kenyan journalist Cyrus Ombati joins us now for more information on this story. Hello, Cyrus. Thank you so much for your time. Tell us, what is the update as we speak? We understand 1 plane crashed and, the other landed safely.
Thank you for having me on this show. What we understand is that both planes had actually taken off from Wilson Airport, and one was headed for Diani, which is the coastal area of Kenya, and the smaller plane, which is a Cessna, was on training. It's a kind of station because it had a trainee pilot and a trainer. So after the bigger one, which is the Dash 8, had actually taken off, which was after the smaller one had taken off. The smaller one now came and hit it from my side of the plane, and it kind of fell off and crashed in the national park. The national park is outside the airport, so that's why it happened within the national park.
So the Cessna plane was on a training session, we understand, carrying 2 people. Do we know more details about these people that have unfortunately lost their lives?
This was a trainer and a trainee. So Wilson Airport actually is the main base for training for pilots in the country, and that's for fixed wing and even the choppers. So they usually fly from Wilson Airport. They go around. They go around the national park and then come back to the airport. So the 2 were pilot and a trainee pilot. So that's why they both died. They're the only ones who were on board of that plane.
An unfortunate one, but have we had any comments so far from the government and, how are citizens reacting?
Yeah, the government says they're investigating how it happened because that's the Kenya Civil Aviation Authority, which is in charge of such kind of accident. And they're saying they're investigating how it happened, but it's an accident. I believe maybe the students were on the plane and they maybe panic. Accidents are accidents, according to those who are aware of it. The good thing is that it happened within the national park. Had it happened on maybe a residential area, because the Wilson Airport is surrounded by many residential areas. So had it happened there, it would have been more catastrophic. But now it happened in the national park. And the news about the accident came out after it had happened, and a few people knew about it. But when it steamed out in the media, that's when Kenya came out to know about it before of the place it happened within the national park, and people came to learn of it when they saw the emergency providers run the national park to kind of rescue those who are trapped in the wreckage. And then unfortunately they died. 2 of them were on board the plane.
All right then, thank you so much, Kenyan journalist Cyrus Ombati. Thank you for your reporting.
Thank you so much.
To other stories now, the U.S. has imposed sanctions on Zimbabwe's President Emmerson Mnangagwa for corruption and human rights abuses. Its sanctions also affect other senior leaders in the country, blocking their assets in the U.S. and barring them from unofficial travel there. The new sanctions replace a broader program that was introduced about 2 decades ago. The White House says it is concerned about what it terms gross abuses of political, economic, and human rights. It says it is refocusing and elevating its efforts to hold individuals and entities that are responsible for this exploitation accountable. Now, some of the other affected officials include First Lady and the Vice President, Defense Minister, and other senior officials, including members of Zimbabwe's National Police and the Central Intelligence Organization. Well, let's get more on this now from Nigel Yamutumbu, a Zimbabwean journalist in Harare. Hello, Nigel. Thank you so much for your time. Tell us, how are Zimbabweans reacting to this latest sanctions on top officials in the country? And now it includes, the president and his wife.
There's been a certain level of confusion as to the import and meaning of the new measures announced by the United States of America's administration in respect to Zimbabwe, particularly the sanctions and restrictions, wherein there has been, on one hand, a sense that the sanctions have been lifted insofar as the lifting of the emergency orders, yet on the other hand, which is the reality in this case, is that the United States of America's administration only abolished the restrictive measures or the sanctions as they had been configured in 2003, and naturally between 2003 and today, there has been quite some significant changes, including changes in the administration in Zimbabwe, and a whole lot of other people that may either have passed on and so on. And others have also been removed by virtue, perhaps, of having left government and so on. So there have been, yes, some initial happy responses from government officials and from those that are apologetic to the administration of President Emerson Mnangagwa. And there has been, the media has been playing a critical role in ensuring that the true story goes out.
Now, have we heard, any comments from those affected, the president, his wife, and, other top officials that, the U.S. has sanctioned?
There hasn't been a coordinated statement by government, either through the official spokespersons outside of what they have been saying on social media, especially on the X platform, where initially the permanent secretary in the Ministry of Information had actually initially welcomed the new measures that had been put in place, only to edit his post to then really reflect upon how the imposition or sustained sanctions on the president and his wife is something that is of concern insofar as Zimbabwe's foreign relations are concerned. And there were other, uncoordinated responses from various government officials. We are yet to really have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which should take the lead to discuss the import of and substance thereof of these new measures, as it is something that will still perhaps be under consideration, and more so perhaps the engagements that have been ongoing between the two administrations will also just continue to happen in the private spaces and not necessarily in the manner in which a lot of the ruling party supporters may want to bring out. So yes, there has been uncoordinated response, and we really wait to see how this will frame and shape the Zimbabwe's relations with the United States of America going forward.
Indeed, Nigel, and seeing that, these sanctions are on senior leaders in the country, what effects, if any, will these sanctions have on Zimbabwe?
Well, look, I think if you still have the Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act, ZIDERA, being among the statutes of the United States of America, there would still be some restrictions and capacity to trade of certain Zimbabwean firms and the United States of America. And by also virtue that there are these new measures that are targeted at the presidium, I mean the president, the vice president, their families and close allies are still subject to these restrictions and sanctions. There would still be some adverse impact on the economy. Perhaps not as significant as the outright sanctions that were initially imposed at the onset of these restrictive measures were put in place. So the impact, which is often exaggerated by the Zimbabwean government, may not be as high, given that right now, most of the measures have really been dealt with in terms, at least, of the law. But as I said, as the Zidera, that is the law, that governs the relations between Zimbabwe and the U.S. is still in place, and also that we still have some individuals, those 9, there would be, I think, some adverse impact on the economy.
All right then, Nigel Yamutumbu, Zimbabwean journalist, thank you so much for your reporting. I will move on to other stories. Judges at the International Crime Court have ruled that prosecutors can bring a hearing on charges against the fugitive Ugandan warlord despite his absence. Joseph Kony was the leader of the notorious Lord's Resistance Army, LRA, which abducted thousands of children to use as soldiers or sex slaves. The hearing has been scheduled for the 15th of October. He is accused of 33 counts of war crimes and crimes against humanity. Mr. Kony formed the LRA in Uganda over 2 decades ago and claimed to be fighting to install a government based on the Bible's 10 commandments. The arrest warrant for Mr. Kony was issued in 2005, but he has evaded capture. He's also accused of brutalizing civilians in northern Uganda through murder, abduction, mutilation, and the burning of property. Meanwhile, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, says the crisis in Sudan is a tragedy that appears to have slipped into the fog of global amnesia. Mr. Turk was speaking at the UN Human Rights Council during his presentation of a new report on violations and abuses of international human rights law committed by the warring parties in Sudan between April and December 2023. He says both factions have consistently acted with impunity and a distinct lack of accountability for the multiple violations committed. He is now calling on all states with influence to increase pressure on the two parties and their affiliates to be able to negotiate a peaceful solution and to pursue and sustain a ceasefire in Sudan.
For nearly 11 months now, the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces, as well as their affiliates, have been fighting a ruthless, senseless conflict. They have killed thousands, seemingly without remorse. They have manufactured a climate of sheer terror, forcing millions to flee. They have let the people who could not or would not escape suffer, destroying medical services and blocking humanitarian aid. And they have consistently acted with impunity and a distinct lack of accountability for the multiple violations that have been committed, continuing to stagnate on any talks and negotiations which would achieve much-needed peace, safety, and dignity for the people of Sudan. In the space of 11 months, at least 14,600 people have been killed and 26 others injured. Actual figures are undoubtedly much higher. The toll encompasses thousands of civilians, including many children and women. Many humanitarian and health workers have also lost their lives as they worked under fire to help people in need. Sudan has become a living nightmare. Almost half of the population, 25 million people, are in urgent need of food and medical aid. Some 80% of hospitals have been put out of service. The apparently deliberate denial of safe and unimpeded access for humanitarian agencies within Sudan itself constitutes a serious violation of international law and may amount to war crime. I call again on the warring parties to meet their legal obligations by opening humanitarian corridors without delay before more lives are lost.
Egyptian Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry has met with his Dutch counterpart Hanke Slot, discussing the need for increased aid to the besieged Gaza Strip in Israel. The Egyptian Foreign Ministry said that talks also focused on enhancing bilateral relations between the two countries, as well as on the war in Gaza and the humanitarian situation. Well, following their meeting in the new administrative capital, the officials held a press conference with Mr. Shoukry giving fresh details about the ongoing negotiations between Israel and Hamas. He says the negotiations are sensitive but have not reached a point to achieve a ceasefire. The U.S., Qatar and Egypt have been trying for weeks now to broker a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, especially before the start of the Muslim month of Ramadan. South Africa's gross domestic product GDP experienced a modest increase of 0.1% in the fourth quarter of 2023. Notably, the transport, storage and communication sector surging by 2.9% during the same period and contributing 0.2 percentage points to the overall GDP growth. Economic activity saw a boost in land and air transport alongside transportation, support services and communication sectors. Statistician General Risenga Maluleke addressed the media earlier today to discuss these developments.
We can see that the industry that performed the most was transport, having performed at 0.2 of a percentage point, followed by mining and quarry, as well as personal services and finance that contributed 0.1 of a percentage point. But those that had a drawdown in the most were trade at negative 0.3 percentage points of a percentage point, and followed by agriculture at negative 0.2 of a percentage point. And indeed, we can see that it's just a coincidence that transport happens to have grown the strongest and indeed contributed the most. But there are times when the growth, the 2.9 that we are seeing of growth, sometimes that growth is not correspondent to the contribution that such a sector has made. Now, we want to make comparisons, and it's the first time we bring these kinds of comparisons to be able to demonstrate that what happened in the third quarter on the left-hand side and what sustains as we report on the fourth quarter. We can see, for example, that in the area of trade, we can see that perhaps right up there with agriculture, it's a second quarter. From the third quarter, it had indicated a negative growth. It continues to show a negative growth. And of course, we can see that construction shows the same, trade shows the same. But there are those that have moved sideways. And indeed, when we look at the sectors, we are saying that the primary sector is the one that contracted by 2%, whereas the secondary and tertiary sector retained a growth of 0.2%.
Back here in Nigeria, the Defense and Police Officers' Wives Association, DEPOA, has commissioned a maternity center built at the Nigerian Defense Academy in Kaduna State. Now, this is part of efforts to improve the health and well-being of wives and children of fallen heroes and serving military personnel living in the barracks. A 2023 report released by the World Health Organization, WHO, shows that a woman dies every 2 minutes as a result of inadequate health care. To curb the rise in cases of maternal and child deaths, especially in the barracks, the Defense and Police Officers' Wives Association, DEPOA, has embarked on the construction of a maternity center at the Nigerian Defense Academy Hospital, Ribadu Cantonment in Kaduna State.
Your presence here today serves as a testament.
The maternity center, which is the brainchild of the immediate past DEPOA president, Mrs. Victoria Irabo, has now been completed and equipped with state-of-the-art medical facilities by the current leader, Mrs. Ogbogo Musa.
In the name of God the Father, Amen. Son, Amen. And Holy Spirit. Amen.
May we please put our hands together.
The commissioning of this maternity center is not just a symbolic gesture. It is a tangible demonstration of our collective commitment to improving maternal and child health outcomes. It represents a significant step forward in our health outcomes.
This project was conceived and executed to pay back to the NDA and military communities. It was initiated based on the necessity of a befitting facility catering to the health of military wives and children in a community like NDA, where cadet training is the institution's focus.
Apart from women and children who are the immediate beneficiaries of the maternity, the NDA Commandant and Executive Secretary of Kaduna State Primary Healthcare Board believes it will also enhance the well-being of soldiers and others within the immediate environment.
DEPOA is a non-governmental organization and does not have a line of budgetary allocation. So it takes a lot of leadership for her to source for the funds to be able to execute this project, considering also the scarce resources available to governments today. So Mrs. Irabo, through her leadership, has executed what is clearly a government responsibility.
Notably, that we enhance, as we believe, the maternal and child healthcare services, not only at this center, but within the immediate environment. By extension, we believe this will go a long way reducing the maternal mortality and the child mortality in the state.
With the commissioning of the maternity center at the Nigerian Defense Academy, wives and children of fallen heroes and 7 military personnel living in the barracks will now have access to quality and affordable healthcare services. Somalia has become a full member of the East African Community, EAC, after completing all the steps required to gain complete membership of the regional bloc. The EAC Secretariat says Somalia had gained full membership after depositing the instrument of ratification with the Secretary General of the bloc. Now that's the formal document issued by a country in which it agrees to be bound by a treaty. Well, last November, the heads of state of the other EAC member states agreed to admit Somalia into the bloc. Now, Somalia becomes the 8th member of the EAC after Burundi, DRC, Kenya, South Sudan, Tanzania, Rwanda, and Uganda. And the move is intended to boost economic growth in the country, which is still recovering from 3 decades of war. Meanwhile, the EAC regional bloc is calling on the public to ignore rumors circulating on social media about the unveiling of new banknotes for the region. The Secretariat says it is fake information, which claims that the bloc's member countries have launched a common regional currency. The post had been shared on a fake X account named Government of East Africa, saying that the currency was called the East African Schiefra, a combination of the shilling of East Africa and franc. The account also shared an image of the fake banknote of the purported single currency. However, the Secretariat is dismissing the report of this unified regional currency, saying that the creation of a single East African currency is still a work in progress. And that's all we have for you today on Network Africa. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Olarinde.